I am Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad. Ramanand Chatterjee founded the journal Modern Review in Kolkata in 1907. It quickly became the journal of India's intelligentsia. Its columnists included Rabindranath Tagore, Verrier Elwin, Sister Nivedita, Charles Freer Andrews, Radha Kamal Mukherjee, and Jadunath Sarkar. Neeraj Chowdhury was the assistant editor of the Modern Review. In 1937, there was a proposal to make Jawaharlal Nehru the president of the Congress Party for a third time. In those days, the president of the Congress Party was termed Rashtrapati, which is now used for the president of the nation. The November 1937 issue of Modern Review carried an article titled Rashtrapati, written under the pseudonym Chanakya. Rashtrapati Jawaharlal Ki Jai. The Rashtrapati looked up as he passed swiftly through the waiting crowds. His hands went up and were joined together in salute, and his pale, hard face was lit up by a smile. It was a warm, personal smile, and the people who saw it responded to it immediately and smiled and cheered in return. The smile passed away, and again the face became stern and sad, impassive in the midst of the emotion that it had roused in the multitude. Almost it seemed that the smile and the gesture accompanying it had little reality behind them. They were just tricks of the trade to gain the goodwill of the crowds whose darling he had become. Was it so? Watch him again. There is a great procession, and tens of thousands of persons surround his car and cheer him in an ecstasy of abandonment. He stands in the seat of the car, balancing himself rather well, straight and seemingly tall, like a god, serene and unmoved by the seething multitude. Suddenly, there is that smile again, or even a merry laugh, and the tension seems to break, and the crowd laughs with him, not knowing what it is laughing at. He is godlike no longer, but a human being, claiming kinship and comradeship with the thousands who surround him, and the crowd feels happy and friendly and takes him to its heart. But the smile is gone, and the pale, stern face is there again. Is all this natural, or the carefully thought out trickery of the public man? Perhaps it is both, and long habit has become second nature now. The most effective pose is one in which there seems to be least of posing, and Jawaharlal has learnt well to act without the paint and powder of the actor. With his seeming carelessness and insouciance, he performs on the public stage with consummate artistry. Whither is this going to lead him and the country? What is he aiming at with all his apparent want of aim? What lies behind that mask of his? What desires, what will to power, what insatiate longings? These questions would be interesting in any event, for Jawaharlal is a personality which compels interest and attention. But they have a vital significance for us, for he is bound up with the present in India and probably the future. And he has the power in him to do great good to India or great injury. We must therefore seek answers to those questions. For nearly 2 years now, he has been president of the Congress, and some people imagine that he is just a camp follower in the working committee of the Congress, suppressed or kept in check by others. And yet, steadily and persistently, he goes on increasing his personal prestige and influence, both with the masses and with all manners of groups and people. He goes to the peasant and the worker, to the zamindar and the capitalist, to the merchant and the peddler, to the Brahmin and the untouchable, to the Muslim, the Sikh, the Christian and the Jew, to all who make up the great variety of Indian life. To all these he speaks in a slightly different language, ever seeking to win them over to his side, with an energy that is astonishing at his age. He has rushed about this vast land of India, and everywhere he has received the most extraordinary of popular welcomes. From the far north to Cape Comorin, he has gone like some triumphant Caesar, passing by, leaving a trail of glory and a legend behind him. Is all this for him just a passing fancy which amuses him, or some deep design, or the play of some force which he himself does not know? Is it his will to power, of which he speaks in his autobiography, that is driving him from crowd to crowd and making him whisper to himself, "I drew these tides of men into my hands and wrote my will across the sky in stars"? What is the fancy turn? Men like Jawaharlal, with all their capacity for great and good work, are unsafe in democracy. He calls himself a Democrat and a socialist, and no doubt he does so in all earnestness. But every psychologist knows that the mind is ultimately a slave to the heart, and logic can always be made to fit in with the desires and irrepressible urges of a person. A little twist, and Jawaharlal might turn a dictator, sweeping aside the paraphernalia of a slow-moving democracy. He might still use the language and slogans of democracy and socialism, but we all know how fascism has fattened on this language and then cast it away as useless lumber. Jawaharlal is certainly not a fascist, not only by conviction, but by temperament. He is far too much of an aristocrat for the crudity and vulgarity of fascism. His very face and voice tell us that private faces in public places are better and nicer than public faces in private places. The fascist face is a public face, and it is not a pleasant face in public or private. Jawaharlal's face, as well as his voice, are definitely private. There is no mistaking that even in a crowd, and his voice at public meetings is an intimate voice which seems to speak to individuals separately in a matter-of-fact, homely way. One wonders, as one hears it or sees that sensitive face, what lies behind them, what thoughts and desires, what strange complexes and repressions, what passions suppressed and turned to energy, what longings which he dare not acknowledge even to himself. The train of thought holds him in public speech, but at other times his looks betray him, for his mind wanders away to strange fields and fancies, and he forgets for a moment his companion and holds inaudible converse with the creatures of his brain. Does he think of the human contacts he has missed in his life's journey? Hard and tempestuous as it has been, does he long for them, or does he dream of the future of his fashioning and of the conflicts and triumphs that he would have fain have? He must know well that there is no resting by the way in the path he has chosen, and even triumph itself means greater burdens. As Lawrence said to the Arabs, there could be no rest houses for revolt, no dividend of joy paid out. Joy may not be for him, but something greater than joy may be his. If fate and fortune are kind, the fulfillment of a life purpose, Jawaharlal cannot become a fascist. And yet, is all the makings of a dictator in him. Vast popularity, a strong will directed to a well-defined purpose, energy, pride, organizational capacity, ability, hardness, and with all his love of a crowd and intolerance of others, and a certain contempt for the weak and the inefficient. His flashes of temper are well known, and even when they are controlled, the curling of his lips betrays him. His overmastering desire to get things done, to sweep away what he dislikes and build anew, will hardly brook for long the slow processes of democracy. He may keep the husk, but he will see to it that it bends to his will. In normal times, he would be just an efficient and successful executive. But in this revolutionary epoch, Caesarism is always at the door. And is it not possible that Jawaharlal might fancy himself as a Caesar? Therein lies the danger for Jawaharlal and for India. For it is not through Caesarism that India will attain freedom, and though she may prosper a little under a benevolent and efficient despotism, she will remain stunted, and the day of the emancipation of her people will be delayed. For 2 consecutive years, Jawaharlal has been president of the Congress, and in some ways he has made himself so indispensable that there are many who suggest that he should be elected for a 3rd term. But a greater disservice to India and even to Jawaharlal can hardly be done. By electing him a 3rd time, we shall exalt one man at the cost of the Congress party, and make the people think in terms of Caesarism. We shall encourage in Jawaharlal the wrong tendencies and increase his conceit and pride. He will become convinced that only he can bear this burden or tackle India's problems. Let us remember that in spite of his apparent indifference to office, he has managed to hold important offices in the Congress party for the last 17 years. He must imagine that he is indispensable and no man must be allowed to think so. India cannot afford to have him as president of the Congress party for a third year in succession. There is a personal reason also for this. In spite of his brave talk, Jawaharlal is obviously tired and stale, and he will progressively deteriorate if he continues as president. He cannot rest, for he who rides a tiger cannot dismount. But we can at least prevent him from going astray and from mental deterioration under too heavy burdens and responsibilities. We have a right to expect good work from him in the future. Let us not spoil that and spoil him by too much adulation and praise. His conceit is already formidable. It must be checked. We want no Caesars. So that was the anonymous article titled Rashtrapati, which appeared in the November 1937 issue of Modern Review under the pseudonym of Chanakya. There was intense speculation as to the identity of the author Chanakya. Heavy pressure was put on the staff of Modern Review to reveal his identity, but they stood firm. And after several months, Jawaharlal Nehru revealed that he himself was the author. But what propelled Jawaharlal Nehru to write this insightful psychological analysis about himself? And I personally chanced upon the answer through some discussions with my neighbor, the well-known sports journalist K. Jagannath Rao, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago, as well as discussions with the prominent political editor K.V. Prasad. And Jagannath Rao and K.V. Prasad both are descendants of a prominent political editor of Allahabad, Kundurti Ishwar Dutt. Sir C.Y. Chintamani, Chiravuri Yajneshwara Chintamani, was the editor of the journal, the leader in Allahabad, Prayagraj, and several fellow Telugu young men gravitated to Allahabad to join Chintamani's editorial team in the leader, and one of them was Ishwar Dutt. And then Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru started a journal called 20th Century in Allahabad, and Sapru offered the editorship and a financial stake to a young Ishwar Dutt. In the 1937 elections, the Congress party won a huge majority. It quickly became clear that Jawaharlal Nehru would be the undisputed leader of the nation when independence was achieved. And Nehru's sister, Srimati Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, became a senior cabinet minister in the United Provinces. And K. Jagannath Rao told me that Kundurti Ishwar Dutt wrote a very caustic, hard-hitting article under his byline that the Nehrus should now be anointed as the new royal family of India. And Nehru was livid at Ishwar Dutt's description of him as imperious and autocratic, and Jawaharlal Nehru complained to his close family friend Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru, emphasizing his democratic credentials, and Sapru very firmly told Nehru, Jawahar, Ishwar Dutt has sound, cogent reasons for writing what he did. The onus is on you, Jawahar, to prove Ishwar Dutt wrong by your actions. And the other backers of the journal 20th Century, Sachidananda Sinha and Sir Shafat Ahmed Khan and Purushottam Das Tandon, they too supported the editor Ishwar Dutt and Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru, firmly telling Nehru that it was up to him to refute Ishwar Dutt by his actions and his performance. And Ishwar Dutt was not the first to comment on Nehru's dictatorial ways. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi had written to Jawaharlal Nehru on 15th July 1936, I tell you they, that is Nehru's colleagues, have dreaded you because of your irritability and impatience of them. They have chafed under your rebukes and magisterial manner, and above all, your arrogation of what has appeared to them your infallibility and superior knowledge. They feel that you have treated them with scant courtesy and never defended them from socialist ridicule and even misrepresentation. So this was Mahatma Gandhi's advice to Jawaharlal Nehru a few months earlier in July 1936. And according to my father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, he was the editor of the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru. So he wrote this in just about an hour or so, and he never intended that it should be published at all. And Nehru had dinner with Padmaja Naidu, and then he went to his desk and wrote this. And next morning at breakfast, Padmaja Naidu found these pages which Nehru had scribbled, and she gently admonished Nehru for deprecating himself. And Nehru replied to Padmaja Naidu, "You imagine me as something other than I am, something nobler, more mysterious, more complicated. Have I not warned you against this fatal error?" And Padmaja Naidu thought that this should be published, and Nehru then suggested that he should use the pseudonym of Chanakya. The wording of Nehru's article in Modern Review of 1937 contains many valuable lessons for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as does Gandhiji's note to Nehru of July 1936. And in the July 1958 issue of Sachin Chowdhury's Economic and Political Weekly, another anonymous article was published titled "After Nehru ... question mark." And this anonymous article predicted that after Nehru, the Congress party would get divided into various squabbling factions which owed their allegiances to regional and caste groupings. And this article began. A popular guessing game in New Delhi today is, after Nehru, what? Diplomats raise this question at almost every cocktail party. Foreign correspondents write long dispatches on this theme. Politicians, both of the Congress and the opposition, have already started jockeying for vantage points against such a contingency. Senior civil servants are hoping that they will retire before Nehru goes. Only the man in the street still seems to be relatively unconcerned. Not that there is no reason for him to worry, but his own worries are too many for him to take on a new one. Vinoba Bhave's forecast that India will never lack leaders good enough to replace Nehru has partly helped him in this Micawberish attitude. There is almost general agreement that so long as Nehru is on the scene, the status quo will continue more or less undisturbed. After he leaves the scene, so long as some veteran Congress leaders of the stature of Pant, Debar, Desai or Menon are there to take up the reins of government, not much change may be expected, although some leftist or rightist members may find themselves squeezed out depending on which of these leaders succeeds Nehru. But that will only make the Congress less of a platform and more of a party. Even after these veterans leave the scene and younger men succeed them, the Congress party will continue to be in power at the center for several years through sheer momentum, although it may lose its hold in several states. But during this period, seeds will be sown for a more fundamental change which is bound to come sooner or later, either through a process of slow erosion culminating in a sudden landslide through the ballot box or through some violent upheaval. And scholars speculated that the author was either Jawaharlal Nehru himself or Sir Edward Penderell Moon. And Nehru had been stating that he wanted to retire as Prime Minister in 1958, 1959, when he turned 70, and provide leadership opportunities to his successor for the 1962 elections. In 1952, Nehru had hoped that Jayaprakash Narayan would succeed him as Prime Minister, and Nehru had invited Jayaprakash Narayan to be his Deputy Prime Minister and be groomed to be his successor. But for various reasons, Jayaprakash Narayan declined to join Nehru's cabinet as Deputy Prime Minister. And Nehru had also, in that time period of 1958, gone on a long vacation where he might have possibly written this. My father, H.Y. Sharada Prasad, who edited Nehru's extempore speeches for publication in the official records, my father could not make out for certain whether or not this was written by Nehru, and my mother, who had worked briefly with Sir Edward Penderel Moon. She said that the style of this anonymous article was not inconsistent with that of Penderel Moon. However, my mother too could not be certain whether or not the author was Penderel Moon. So please subscribe to my channels on YouTube and IGTV, and please follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. My Twitter account is @RVP. @RVP is my Twitter account. On my YouTube channel, I will be uploading several more videos about my views on politics, the economy, business and industry, and about technology. So please subscribe to my YouTube and IGTV channels. This is Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Sharada, Prasad saying goodbye. Have a great day.